The idea of a street grid has been used in city planning for millennia. Perhaps the most well-known grid system is the one that spread through the colonies of the Roman Empire. The archetypal Roman grid was introduced to Italy first by the Greeks, with such information transferred by way of trade and conquest. But it wasn't until William Penn, all the way back in 1682, when the first street grid we know and love was used in the citywide scale in the US. At the time, in the British province of Pennsylvania. The colonial-era Quaker, whose father was the namesake for the great state of Pennsylvania, owned a large plot of land granted to him by King Charles II in present-day Philadelphia. Penn officially founded the city of Philadelphia in 1682 when it had a population of just about 50 farmers. It was then when he had a brilliant idea to master plan his new city using principles of his faith in combination with his disdain for the complicated and plague-ridden streets of London, creating the New World's first citywide street grid. It was an idea that would turn out to be radical and even somewhat unpopular at first, but would go on to help develop the city of Philadelphia into the birthplace of America. If you're new here, this is Fourth Place, your place to learn about US geography, transportation, urbanism, and city planning. If you're interested in one or all of those, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything new. Some of the greatest ideas, concepts, and inventions ever imagined came from the people who built and lived in this great city. The Declaration of Independence and Constitution were both written and signed here, so it's no wonder why Philadelphia is a pioneer in American urban planning principles. More specifically, it was the first city to implement a large-scale street grid in the US. It's a grid that facilitated the long-time prosperity not only of Philadelphia itself, but of many other cities throughout the US. New York City, San Francisco, Miami Beach. If some of the most walkable cities in the US only have one thing in common, it's that they were all built on a grid. But what exactly makes the street grid so great for pedestrians and walkability? Well, the way William Penn saw it, grid patterns simplified navigation, very important in a time without GPS. Grid patterns also encouraged orderly development and facilitated commerce by providing clear pathways for transportation and communication. Moreover, Penn, a Quaker, aimed to create a city that embodied Quaker principles of equality and community reflected in the grid's egalitarian distribution of space and its specific provision for public squares and parks. This design also aligned with Penn's vision of a city that would be both practical and harmonious, promoting social cohesion and economic prosperity among its residents. So the adoption of a grid system in Philadelphia was not just a matter of urban planning, but also a reflection of Penn's philosophical and practical ideas for the city he founded. And if you've ever been to Philadelphia, you'll quickly see just how walkable the city is, thanks in large part to its uniform street grid. When I recently took a trip in May of 2024, I was shocked that I was able to walk from my hotel right in the Center City neighborhood to just about anywhere in the Philadelphia, peninsula? How do you Philly locals refer to the geography of this piece of land? Let me know down in the comments section below. Anyway, I found myself walking from Center City to Old City to South Philadelphia without so much as breaking a sweat or having much of any issues with busy stroads or other impediments. Everything was so dense and close, but not overwhelmingly so. I never really had to cross any major thoroughfares with the exception of Broad Street, but that's it. And even walking along Broad Street isn't that bad at all. Sidewalks are wide, red lights are frequent, all thanks to, you guessed it, the street grid. As someone who experiences Los Angeles' walkability woes on a daily basis, it was refreshing not to have to press the dreaded pedestrian call button and wait like 2 or 3 minutes in order to cross the street. In fact, I maybe saw 2 crosswalk signs during my entire 5-day stay in the city. The streets are tight in modern day standards, and cars are moving at such slow speeds that once the light turns green, you don't even need a walk sign. Within the street grid, you rarely ever feel like you're fighting car traffic. There are more people than cars, and the people have the power, and drivers know that. It was almost as if I was seeing pedestrians put cars in their place, something opposite of life here in LA. And this is again thanks to the city's street grid. The street grid was so clearly made for people and not cars. And I mean, there weren't any Mustangs driving through the cobblestone streets of Philadelphia in 1682. Well, besides maybe this kind of Mustang. This is a city planned with dense urban living at its forefront. In order to see literally any single-family housing, you have to travel across either river, and even then it's a challenge. You really have to be far from downtown to not see anything stacked atop anything else. Multi-use and multi-family development is abundant, and it just gives the city so much life and offers up a unique character. And with the city as old as it is, having gone through so many eras of American history, you can expect to see a lot of adaptive reuse here as well. It truly is an urbanist delight. So let's take a look at William Penn's original street grid plan and compare it to modern-day Philadelphia's grid. Back in 1682, William Penn tasked surveyor Thomas Holme to design a system of wide streets intersecting at right angles between the Schuylkill River and the Delaware River to the east. At the heart of the city, they placed 5 public squares, meant to serve as communal green spaces. This design promoted order, facilitated navigation, and aimed to prevent the spread of fires and diseases, which were common in the densely packed European cities of the era. The wide streets and ample public spaces reflected Penn's vision of a city that combined the best elements of urban and rural life, setting a precedent for future urban developments in the US. This idea of mixing urban and rural life is evident in the early street names of Walnut, Chestnut, Pine, and Vine streets, which are still around today. The implementation of the street grid plan involved a strict adherence to its principles. Settlers were required to build their homes according to the designated plots and street layouts. Over time, as more settlers arrived, the city expanded following the grid pattern, for the most part, which ensured consistency and order in its growth. And let's take a look at what those 5 green spaces outlined in Penn's original plan look like in the present day. They're not all intact, as per the original plan. Rittenhouse Square is the only perfect green square that remains. This square is still a green space, but is now also used as a venue for weekly farmers, flea, and vendor markets, which wrap around the entire square. On market days, this area is incredibly vibrant. The square is located next to the city's most popular retail corridors on Walnut and Chestnut streets, meaning that the square is sitting on some of the most desirable land in the city, making it a great place to spend time in Philadelphia, just as Penn imagined. Second, Logan Square is no longer shaped like a square. Rather, its current shape resembles that of Washington, D.C. The city is patriotic without even trying. Logan Square also now has a busy roundabout intersection going through it, which has been the case since the early 1900s. It's located in the Logan Square neighborhood, naturally, and is somewhat a part of the semi-contiguous green space leading to the famous Philadelphia Museum of Art. I say semi-contiguous because, as I found out on my visit, this place is more asphalt than green space at this point. This place was a traffic nightmare and one mess of a road system, but it has enough pedestrian paths leading to an even more expansive green space, so I guess it's okay. Franklin Square is almost a perfect square, and you can really see the city's dedication to its preservation in the way that I-676 was built skirting around it. This one is in the Old City neighborhood, and is sort of connected to the Independence Mall green space. In the 1920s, the park was abandoned, and the surrounding area became known locally as the Tenderloin, with entertainment districts featuring taverns and bordellos, and became a place for homeless to sleep on the park's benches, resulting in its reputation as Philadelphia's Skid Row. In 2003, Historic Philadelphia Incorporated renovated the park by adding commercial businesses and houses to attract tourists, which in turn helped the park back to its originality. Tourists and locals alike are now able to enjoy the renovated park and the surrounding nature, meaning the park has been restored to its original plan as William Penn wanted it to be used. Washington Square is also located in Old City and is also almost a perfect square, and also sort of connected to Independence Mall. It's a great place to take a stroll surrounded by buildings built in a time when George Washington was our president. It's complete with dog walkers, sightseers, and historic army memorials on any given day. And finally, on the land that was once Penn Square, now sits Philadelphia's iconic and impressive City Hall building. The place is one of my favorite structures in the entire country, and was actually the tallest building in the world from 1894 to 1908, but my hotel room in 2024 looked down upon it. It's amazing how fast things change, isn't it? While Philadelphia's exceptional walkability is thanks mostly to its street grid, it's also made better because of how the grid marries itself to the city's geography as a whole. The street grid fits snugly into Philadelphia's geography, creating a perfect storm for a great pedestrian experience. The downtown Philadelphia area is not as large as San Francisco, for example, even if San Francisco's infrastructure makes for a great walking city. Well, beside the hills, of course. Philadelphia's peninsula just isn't that big, only 2 miles wide at its core, with so much density packed in between. Contrast this to San Francisco's peninsula at nearly 7 miles wide, and it just makes sense that Philadelphia is more walkable than most large cities overall. Its geography constrains expansion, meaning more dense urban development only makes sense. So the grid, in combination with the city's geography itself, makes Philadelphia ideal for exploring on foot. Neighborhoods are compact and organized, facilitating trade and commerce, the exchange of ideas, and harboring abundant common spaces. But when looking at the expansion of Penn's grid in the modern day, especially through the popular and culturally rich South Philadelphia area, you'll notice one glaring oddity that stands out among the grid, slicing through it like a hot knife through butter. This oddity would be the angular street of East Passyunk Ave, famous for its abundance of cheesesteak restaurants and hard-to-pronounce name. It makes up one of the city's many walkable historic districts, and operates as one of its few arterial thoroughfares. A thoroughfare clearly not made with cars in mind, but rather pedestrians, judging by its intimate urban fabric and roads that are just a bit too tight for fast-moving modern vehicular traffic. Walking along East Passyunk Avenue in South Philadelphia offers an immersive urban experience characterized by a lively and engaging atmosphere. The avenue is lined with a mix of historic buildings and modern establishments, creating a visually appealing streetscape. Local businesses, including coffee shops, boutiques, restaurants, and bars, spill out onto the sidewalks with indoor and outdoor seating areas, inviting pedestrians to pause and enjoy the vibrant street life on wide sidewalks. These wide, tree-lined sidewalks, ample street furniture, and art installations add to the aesthetic charm, making the walk both pleasant and stimulating. The grid-shaped neighborhood layout surrounding East Passyunk Ave supports walkability, with buildings oriented toward the street and frequent crosswalks ensuring safety and convenience for pedestrians. And where the angular avenue meets the street grid, micro-parks have formed, offering even more pleasant, green, common areas to enjoy. And this doesn't just go for the East Passyunk neighborhood. Fishtown, Old City, Northern Liberties, South Street, Fairmount, Rittenhouse, Center City, Point Breeze, they're all like this more or less. And it's not just Philadelphia's grid alone that makes the city the most walkable in the US. It's the combination of so many of these people-focused ideas originally thought up by William Penn back in 1682 that eventually led to the development of what I believe to be the most walkable city in the US. Penn's idea of a city planned and built from its foundation on equality, community, and egalitarian distribution of space has been seen all the way through even centuries in the future. It's evident that Philadelphia's centuries-old street grid remains crucial and highly effective in the present-day urban landscape. And as the US expanded westward, grid-based city planning modeled on Philadelphia's layout would become popular among frontier cities, making grids ubiquitous across the country. And as soon as 1733, a similar plan was famously implemented by James Oglethorpe in the urban planning of Savannah, Georgia, a fascinating street grid with a further emphasis on green spaces in the form of squares. Some urbanists have even called Savannah's grid the most intelligent grid in America. From Chicago to Boise, Salt Lake City to Seattle, the beneficial effects of an orderly urban street grid design have been seen throughout the nation since Philadelphia was the first to do it. If there's no other truth in city planning at all, the most important one is this. Truly great street designs, one that put people before anything else, do last. And if the implementation of these ideas also puts people first, as William Penn's plan did, they can last for centuries. I'll see you next week on Fourth Place.